record on this computer. After you create your rig, you have, oh, how do you add a mouth rig? Well, the control for the jaw joint, it comes pre-packaged with the rig, and you can kind of open it up and down. But the thing that you have to do with these controls is you have to do kind of like these child-parent controls in here. I would recommend not doing, in fact, I don't want you guys to do a mouth rig or like a face rig, because it's like, it'll just be way too much time and way too kind of finicky. But yeah, but the main, oh, got a message on Discord, I think. Wait a minute. Oh, no, I guess not. The main thing to keep in mind is that under each of these controls is an invisible kind of empty group, like an empty null. And then you have the control above that. And then for this control specifically, I have this control driving yet another invisible group under this control. And then this control drives this joint via constraints. Now these bigger controls also influence these surrounding smaller controls. That way you can get some nice clean shapes. So that was kind of my method for getting that the mouth shapes for that. You can kind of pose all of those separately. You can also do a blend shape based rig, which is basically you copy your mesh and then you paste it, and then you go into each vert and model an expression that you want on your blend shape. And then you have a control driving that blend shape that blends it to be that expression. So there's a few ways to do like mouth and face rigs. But I went with a joint-based one because I was exporting to a game engine. Now, sorry for that tangent. I just wanted you guys to know, just in case you were curious. Now, so you've generated your rig at this point, and you have this joint hierarchy. I want to be very clear with this. Don't ever select these joints after they're created and move them around. You can move those proxies. Remember, we have that proxies layer in here, and it's this layer with all those on it. But like moving those is fine. Just do not move these joints, because the way that we move these joints is through all of these controls that are on the rig. All of these ones right here. So you have these, and notice how it's moving those joints that are lying underneath it. If you go in and accidentally move those joints, like if instead of rotating this FK arm control, you went in and selected this joint and started moving it, that would break the rig, and it would, like, basically you'd have to open up a previous version of the file. And we had some students last semester that weren't saving incrementally, so then they lost a lot of progress or just had not as good of a result for their final. And that's just awful. Like, I want to avoid that. So just to be clear, don't touch these joints after they've been created. I usually, it comes paired with a layer. Your guys' layer will be called here, well, not hero. It'll be whatever your character's name is, _ joints layer. Elaine, yeah, Elaine, that's what I was trying to let you know about earlier, was that you should not be moving those joints. But yeah, so as soon as that layer, as soon as you generate that rig, I immediately go in and make sure that those are on a reference layer. So now I can't click those anymore. I can only click the mesh and the controls. So that's just going to help with skinning as well, but it's also important for animation because we don't want to break our rig and then not be able to animate anything. As for rig, well, let me make sure I'm not going out of order. work, projects, resizing controls. Okay. Moving routine. Okay. All right. So you may have noticed that we have like a bunch of these NURBS curves around here. So these like basic colored circles and trying like arrow type things. And you probably, if you press 4 to go into wireframe mode, you can pop open. You can see pretty clearly where all of your controls are in here. Now these controls kind of come generated sort of small sometimes, to be honest. And I'm going to scale this one down. And let's go into shaded mode. So notice how you might have a control that's like completely inside the mesh. Like this one's pretty close. Like you can only see that at that one point of it. I want you guys to go through and start getting those to be more visible. And the way we're going to do that is not by moving the control, right? Because this control controls the spine. We're going to instead hold right click over that curve shape and go to Control Vertex. And I'm just going to drag select over all of those. If you drag select over that and you select your skeleton, it's because it's not on a reference layer, and you need to fix that up. But yeah, so get all those control verts selected, and you can just scale these right up and not have to worry about it. So I usually just scale this up to a point where I can easily select it. And then if you go back into object mode, you can just select that control super easily. You don't have to worry about going into wireframe mode and finding it within the model. It's just sitting right on the outside. I noticed that it does it a lot with the clav control. This L clavicle C, that one's always inside. It's always inside. It's so annoying. So I usually, wait a minute, I got more than one object selected in there. But yeah, so you just control by control would go in, hold right click on the curve object, and then kind of scale it up, scale it down to whatever size you need. And because I'm a little bit OCD, I will often select like the symmetrical ones, because you can't really mirror the size of those verts over, those control verts. So I'll select both at a time, and then go into hold right click and go to Control Vertex, and then hold right click again and go into Control Vertex. So now you can see both sides control verts at the same time. There's little magenta, pink, purplish things. And then I would just go in and kind of scale those up, scale on this axis, whichever way you need in order to get that control nice and easy to select. And yeah, so you'll often have to do it on these ones. Remember, just go to Control Vert and then scale it up and down. Just be sure not to scale them in the wrong mode. Always make sure you're scaling them up in Control Vertex, so you're actually moving around little Bezier points for those particular objects. So yeah, if that's not done yet on your guys' side, I'm gonna kind of just give you like 5 or so minutes to do that right now. And I'm gonna go get a drink of water, and I'll be back at 4:40. So yeah, just use this time to size up those controls so they're easily selectable. And yeah, I'll be right back. So we just want everything visible through the model when it's solid. Yes, that's pretty much, yeah. When it's in that regular shaded mode, it'd be best to be able to see the controls, just for ease of selecting and animating. To scale them up, once you select the verts, you go into Control Vertex mode while you have that object selected. So you go in there, and then Control Vertex, and then you have a bunch of these magenta points kind of pop up, and you just drag select over those, and then press R to scale like we normally do with everything else, and then it should be able to shrink and expand like that. Be careful though, if you are drag selecting over these, and it could accidentally select your joints if you have those not on a reference layer. Like if those aren't on a reference layer, you might accidentally select your skeleton, which would be bad. Does the body need to be locked? I'm assuming you're talking about skin weights. It's hard to. If you're talking about skin weights, no, this doesn't have anything to do with skin weights particularly. This is just for ease of selection when we're animating, which we're going to be doing next. I'm going to give it is already 4:40, but I'll give it a few more minutes just because I want to make sure everyone's on the same page. I am going to be making some noise while I eat some Cheerios. But yeah, hit me up with any questions. I'm gonna resume lecture at 4:45. I'll just be sitting in a chair though, so I'll be able to hear any questions you guys have, or see them, I guess. How do you select on both sides so they are symmetrical? All right, so if you have like two shoulder controls or something, that are kind of inside the mesh. Select both of them in object mode. So I just left clicked one, then shift left click the other one, so I have them both selected. Now hold right click and go to control vertex, and you'll notice that only one side became control vertex. So if you hold right click again and go to control vertex again, then the other side pops into control vertex. It's just a little like Maya thing. Like Maya just won't display all the control vertexes at one time. You have to kind of go through object by object. But then once you have both of them visible, you can just left click drag over both of them, and you can scale them from there. Scale them to whatever size you need them to be. And make sure that you have no values on these, by the way, when you're doing this. Like make sure you have no translation, no rotation values on these controls. Because that it could like if you do a symmetrical thing like that, and one of them's like a little bit off, like if this one was like rotated a little bit upward, and then you try that, it would kind of fall off symmetry. All right. So it is 4:45. Time to move on in the list. Let's see what else we got on this list today. So resizing controls, and then moving / rotating. FK versus IK. Okay. So we have these skeletons that have been generated for us in the rig on top of it, and we will be using only the controls of the rig to move it. And I've gotten this question a few times already as well, but let me shrink this down. Okay, here we go. So on this waist control, for instance, if you select it and then press W, you can move it, right? You can move that right around. However, you can also rotate it. Now, in your arm's default state, like when you generate the rig, it's going to be in something that we call FK. And one of the primary features of FK is that you cannot move it with translation. So you can't move it with the move tool, the W tool. So you can't press W and move it around. Instead, you have to only rotate it, pressing E. So pressing E, you can see that you can move that around. Pressing W, you cannot. That's just locked in there. Same with the wrist in FK mode. So you can only rotate that around. This shoulder is a little bit of an outlier, but it is still an FK, and as such, you should only rotate it. Should not move it, even though it is technically possible. That would just break this. The skeleton is basically just messed up there. So you should not be posing that around like that. Only use the rotation tool for FK. Now you might be wondering, like, what the hell is FK? You've been saying that for the past 2 minutes, Mike. What the hell does that mean? So FK stands for forward kinematics, all right? So don't worry about the word kinematics. It's just like how things move. The forward part is the important part of that vocabulary word. So forward means it evaluates this joint chain down the hierarchy. So it looks at this control first. Like Maya's like, all right, I need to find out where this wrist is. So it looks at this control first because it's higher up the hierarchy, and it checks the rotation of it. And it's like, okay, so that shoulder is rotating a little bit downward. So I'm going to place this elbow downward as well. And then it looks at that elbow joint and it's like, how rotated is that control? And then it finds that number out, and then it figures out where to position the wrist from there. So it's like, I know where my good old wrist is. So that's FK. It means it just goes down the joint chain to figure out where the rest of these joints are going to be. Now, there's one thing to note is that you can't rotate this elbow control on any axis besides this Y rotate. And that's because it would just straight up break, right? Like regular human elbows don't rotate like that. So why should this one, you know? And let's bring this back to the default values. I'm just gonna select these. And I'm just gonna left click drag over those rotate X, Y, Z boxes up here. So I'm just returning these to their default position. Now, if I click on this little arrow, and this is pretty universal for most rigs. Most rigs have some sort of IK, FK switch to switch between forward kinematics and something called inverse kinematics. So if you select this thing, this little node right here, and then look in your channel box, you'll see switch IK, FK. So if you set that to 0, your hand is now in IK, which means you pose the hand first, and then Maya looks at that wrist location and then does the math to figure out how these two other joints should be rotating in order to get the wrist at that location. And this is really good. This is IK is really good for posing. It's really good for posing. You can pose it pretty much like a stop motion puppet, which is like why I love animating in 3D. It's because it's just, you get to focus so much more on posing rather than draftsmanship of the character. And that's right down my alley. So in IK, you get to move and rotate this hand control that pops up. And then you have this back elbow. And this is called a pull vector. But this just basically tells which way, it tells the rig which way to point that elbow out into space. So those are the two kind of different ways that you're gonna be posing these arms. Same goes for the legs. Though for the most part, animating animating legs, you'll be using IK. You'll be using primarily IK. So and that's because by nature of IK, you can just put one of these controls on the ground somewhere, and then it'll be so much easier to have that contact, right? Because you won't have to animate it every single frame perfectly in order to make it contact with a surface or something. So using IK, you're going to be animating mostly contacts. That's why for a lot of ARM stuff, including what I'll be animating today, you keep it primarily in FK. Let's see, any questions? No, looking good. So I'm going to keep most of these in FK. And again, I'm just going to zero out the controls just so there's no confusion. And I'm just doing that by left click dragging over these channel boxes and then just pressing 0 in there, except for scale. Scale is always at 1 by default. So I'm going to switch this back to FK. And I'm just going to do that by selecting this wrist joint in here. Oh, I'm glad you asked that, Irene. I was just about to answer that. I'm just going to switch back into FK, and you do that by you'll have either this looking control here or this sort of control. Either way, right behind that wrist is this switch control right here. And so if you click on that switch control, and then go into your channel box. The channel box is always on the right side, unless you've been messing with your UI, in which it could be somewhere else. In order to find it, you can always click this button up at the top right. And then you can go in to this top value, this switch IK/FK. 0 is for IK, 1 is for FK. So I want these to be in 1, and for FK, because I want to do some FK animation today. And the same goes for the feet here, as I was saying before. Its IK switch is right behind the ankle though. So if I select that control and then go to the switch IK/FK, if I wanted FK legs, I would do this, and you would see that it gives me some extra controls in here. And you can rotate these around. And get that perfect posing of whatever you wanted to animate there. So I'm going to zero those out again. And I'm going to go back into IK legs by putting 0 into this switch IK/FK box on this little node right here, on this little control right behind the ankle. So that's that's pretty much all we're going to be worrying about as far as like extra controls. There are a lot of other features on this rig though. You guys might not have the face in there, but that's fine. You will have this eye aim, but depending on how your eyes are constructed, you might not be worrying about it. But let's see, do I have textures on here? Yeah. So if you select this eye aim, you can switch between global and local. So in global mode, if you skin the character correctly, when you move these around, like these other controls, look at how the character, let me turn off the joints so it's not getting in the way. Look how the character kind of just follows that point with his eyes. So that's global mode. But local, so if I switch this to 0, similar to that IK/FK, if I rotate it now, he's just gonna stare straight forward. So that's definitely is like a user preference on like how you want to control the eye looks. Either way is completely fine by me. But yeah, you have separate eye movements as well, so you can make them look really messed up if it so pleases you. These are the head controls and the neck controls right here. And when I'm dealing with head and neck, even though they do have IK features, I don't want to break my rig like that, you know? So I'm going to mostly just use the rotate tool with E whenever I'm posing this, kind of like an action figure. Same goes for the spine. The spine has a lot of malleability in it, but I'm going to primarily use rotate instead of move, because if your character starts stretching slowly throughout the scene, if you have a bunch of translate values in here, your eye is gonna be able to catch that, and it's gonna be like, hey, something's wrong with that. It's like when you're traditionally animating and then you slowly accidentally draw a character smaller and smaller throughout a scene, and you're like, oh man, this character's definitely like shrunk like to 75% of their size throughout the scene. And you have the hip control. This is fairly straightforward. You just move it around, you can rotate it all you want. And then you have you have this like little extra hip control in case you need it. You don't, in most cases you don't really though. That's only for like slight fixes at the end of things. Definitely makes them look sassier. You be strutting around like this. Hell yeah. Hell yeah. Hips don't lie. Yeah, they're not lying one bit. 100% the truth. And then for the feet, there's a lot of extra controls in here. Like you have your regular, like whenever you open up a new rig, guys, always look at the channel box. Like there might be some extra controls that you weren't aware of before, hidden in this channel box. Like for instance, if I wanted to raise him onto his tippy toes, you would think it would be somewhere on here, right? But this kind of just controls the pivot from the very, very tip of the toe. But I want him to actually kind of get up onto the balls of the feet. In order to do that, you're going to want to look in your channel box and adjust the heel ball value. You can just left click drag that to get some values in there. And this one's super nice because you can get a lot of like kind of like scrunching up of that foot in there. It's really good because we're on our toes a lot. This one, toe up down, kind of just does exactly what it sounds like. Just kind of squeezes that up or down. Ball swivel, not as useful as heel ball, but it kind of like, it's like if you're putting out a cigarette butt, usually not that I smoke or anything, but you know, in an alternate universe where I did. Foot tilt, if you drag that one around, it's gonna tilt off of where we set those locators on the sides of the feet before. This is a good stretch before you do any physical activity, so you don't roll your foot or roll your ankle. Pretty nice. And these are the pull vectors for the knees. Taiki, you're going to want to not touch these ones at all, for the most part. But yeah, so you can control where exactly that knee bends. This is starting to look a little bit gross because that leg would be definitely broken. In Taiki's case, we had a rig that needed to have a different kind of space on this knee joint. So we wanted this knee to always follow the foot whenever the foot was rotating, just because it's less likely to break his rig then. Because he had like some robot parts that were very particular in how they had to move. And you'll notice in your channel box, you have a follow node in here, or a follow attribute. So if you set that to foot, it's really cool because you can just kind of pose that around and notice how that knee follows the rotation of that foot completely. And it's really cool. I love that feature. I usually enable it on all my knees. I'm not gonna do it for this tutorial though. I'll just do it the manual way. There's some other shoulder orient stuff which deals with how this clavicle moves, but this I would leave it at its default because otherwise it will just be parented straight to that. But notice how this FK chain retains the angle that it's at when you're kind of adjusting the shoulders. So you can shrug your shoulders really easily. You can do a lot of that stuff. So I usually just keep it at its default value there. Let's see, are there any other ones that I'm forgetting? I think we are pretty much good. Let me see. Yeah, all right. I don't think there's anything else that we need to worry about as far as controls go. There are some like extra, like there's this palm control. I don't have anything bound to it though. But these finger controls, like this thumb curl 1, 2, 3, thumb, like they're kind of cool because like if you drag into one of those channels and you start bending it around, it bends that thumb exactly like how you'd expect. But like when you're animating a scene for real, like, and you need to get a specific hand pose, I wouldn't use any of these because like these values are going to get really confusing. So if you had all of those like at some random value, then you need to open that hand up again. You'd have to like kind of counter animate it. So it's gonna like, that's gonna be really annoying. So I do not recommend using that control really. I would just go in and get the hand shape that you want. But if you're having really basic hand shapes and you don't want to, you're not like getting like real deep into the animation side of things, then like you could use these channels, but I find them kind of tedious and not worthwhile. And that's pretty much it. Everyone has a jaw control, but that not everyone has a mouth even. So I don't expect you guys to animate with this control or anything. But yeah, so that's just like a brief overview, or not brief. That was like 20, 30 minutes, but that was a little overview of what these controls kind of do. You'll see some extra controls on my guy because I have to like do some kind of extra moving around of stuff to fix things. But on your side, I don't expect any like extra controls. But I have seen a lot of cool extra things that people have added onto their rigs, like tails and like chest plate kind of movement joints. It's really cool stuff. I like what I'm seeing. But as soon as you get those controls all sized up and kind of get a good feel for what they're doing, we're ready to start working on our final scene. So I'm going to go hop into that right now. I'm gonna stop the